I think it's time we have a conversation, as some would say, a come to Jesus talk, helping us come to a realization of what is currently happening. Before, when it was Pierre Poilievre against Justin Trudeau, well, Pierre Poilievre was walking away with this one. It was not even close. It was getting to epic proportions of conservatives having a super wicked majority. Like they were coming up with new words of how bad of a majority this was going to be. And then Trudeau steps down, becomes the interim PM. And then they start a liberal leadership race. And then this guy, Mark Carney, comes out from behind the shadows of the Liberal Party and says, well, you know what? I'm going to put my name forward. I want to lead this party and effectively become the prime minister. And then we start seeing his cachet grow up. And because the way media have been reporting and operating, we started seeing voters associate Carney's name as the leader of the Liberal Party. And we started seeing the polls start to converge to the point now where some polls are saying Carney is in the lead. There are some polls saying that he's getting closer. All we know is that the race is tightening depending on which poll you are currently looking at. And to the conservative demise, a lot of conversations I'm seeing on social media and different conservative circles is, it's just all fake news. The pollsters, at first it was, it's just Ecos and Main Street. Can't really trust them. And then we started seeing more reputable firms start reporting numbers that were starting to semi-favor liberals. And the conversation started quickly devolving to, this is all one big conspiracy theory. They don't want Poilievre in. Look how the media is reporting on it. They don't want him to get in. So clearly, all the polling firms are in on it and want to make sure Poilievre doesn't get in. So they want to demoralize the base and not allow a conservative win. And sure, I believe some of that is true. I don't believe it in terms of the pollsters. And right now, the detriment to the Conservative Party, if the voters in the base continue on this idea that the world's just against us, all this is fake news, we'll be just fine, it could end up being your demise. We look at the updated aggregate. This chart has been floating around yesterday. I'm sure you've seen it at this point. We see these last two data points is assuming Carney is the leader of the Liberal Party. And we start seeing this gap close dramatically on the Poilievre conservatives. And this is noticeably getting the left really excited and like, hey, we might be able to avoid a Poilievre government. And some conservatives are getting demoralized. Like, oh man, this is all fake. It's not true. It's not real. And what I say to that is take the polls for the grain of salt that they are, but do not assume that they're just lying or they have faulty data. Yes, you can criticize the type of demographics that they're going after. You can criticize the data pool. You can criticize all these things. But the reality is at the end of the day is do not write it off as nothing, or you will get caught and lose the real poll, which would be the election. Because what I want to say is this. Keep this in mind. Yes, we're starting to see these lines converge, but do not forget that we saw something very similar happen south of the border. We had Trump up big on Harris because of the huge lead he had on Biden. Essentially, Biden was way down here and Trump was way up here. Then they installed Harris and Harris got closer. And then eventually, a month after her announcing that she would be taking over or be running as the Democrat nominee, the lines converged, and then Harris was leading the rest of the way from August all the way on to November. And look at those data points. They are everywhere, aren't they? And then look what happened. Trump won in very convincing fashion. The polls ended up being off of who ended up winning the elections because specific demographics showed up that don't typically show up, which was the young generation who were tired of the status quo and wanted something drastically different, and they came out in huge numbers. The same thing needs to happen here in Canada. If the young people do not get out and vote, there will be a potentially either a conservative minority or a liberal minority. That will be what happens if we don't get out and engage people in the electoral process. And if we start becoming insulated and saying, it's all fake, then we will also run the risk of not reaching out to people that need to be reached out to get them out to vote. Because right now, this is kind of the reality we're seeing within the Liberal Party. These are the 5 nominees. Obviously, we recognize Carney, Gould, Freeland. And these are the amount of donors. Look at the donor differentiation between Carney and Gould, who's in second place, which the fact that Gould is outpacing Freeland is wild in terms of donations. And these are outdated numbers. They have increased since, but this is giving you kind of a snapshot of where things are at. Carney close to $2 million raised. The next closest one being at $236,000. So he's won over the liberal establishment, the liberal voters, the liberal stakeholders in a huge way. So we'll see it happens in the Liberal leadership race. But this is what we're seeing. Carney's got all the funding behind him. He's got all the stakeholders behind him. He has the Liberal establishment behind him. He has no reason to lose a Liberal leadership race at this point. So it'd be wild to see an upset. But this is, if we're assuming Carney's going to win and the way the media is covering for him and covering him in general, you can assume that he's likely going to take leadership of this party. And he will, from what we're hearing from the NDP and the Conservative Party, will call an election March 10th, which leads me to a point Marty up north made on X. He says, according to many of you, I suppose you believe that Main Street Research, Ecos, Leger, Abacus Data, Nanos Research, Palace Data, Innovative Research, and Ipsos, all fairly reputable companies that do work for provincial governments, the federal parties, municipalities, private industry, the advertising sector, and more, all decided to conspire together and promote the Liberal Party. For months, when the polls favored the Conservatives, everyone loved the data. All through 2024, not once did I ever hear anyone say all polling companies are working for the Liberals. But now because you disagree with the data, it's all fake? You think these companies will risk their reputation and future work just for a few bucks between now and April? Seriously, do better than that. I believe the recent trend is real, and I'm more interested in exploring the reason for it instead of just dismissing it as a Liberal psyop. And he goes on to show the rating of each of these polling firms. And I agree with Marty on this. Stop dismissing the data that we're seeing because it will be to your detriment. But if you instead look at the data, try to understand why we're seeing this shift, that allows you and allows us as people, whether it be the Conservative Party, their political strategists, or even you as a person when you're having conversations with people, it allows you to talk to the other side of the aisle and figure out what is exciting them about this Mark Carney individual and why all of a sudden they would want to shift to vote in a party that has clearly not done anything for the country. Why would you support the party when it's just simply a change in face? And that is the conversation we need to be having right now. Don't dismiss it, acknowledge it, ask questions, and see what's really going on. And that way we can actually adjust to what we're seeing. Because rhetoric like this is not going to help. Mark Nixon saying the newest Angus Reid poll looks like they're polling the over 65 crowd, dismissing the poll altogether, which was the net favorable polling. To dismiss it as, oh, it's just a bunch of boomers, which is partially true, is not helpful. Because even in my anecdotal conversations living in a very liberal area, people that were once begrudgingly going to vote for Poilievre are now chomping at the bit to vote for Carney. And that's just an anecdote. So seeing the polls are semi-reflecting what I'm seeing in my everyday interactions should get you asking the question of what is happening and why this is taking place. Because we see on the Harris and Trump polls from July on to November, we see these data points and they're all over the place. They look very similar actually to what we see here. The data points being all over the place recently. So what is happening? What is taking place? And why is there all of a sudden excitement around this Carney individual? Now, Kirk Lubomov said it best. Why are you surprised that Mark Carney and the Liberals are closing the gap in the polls? Let's talk about this. And I want to echo that sentiment. Use the comment section down below. Why do you think they're closing the gap? And let's have an educated conversation on this issue. You can take the time to maybe come at me and yell at me and be upset by what I'm saying, or we can have a real conversation of what is currently happening, why it's happening, and how we can adjust and shift our focus and making sure that we don't allow this corrupt liberal establishment to keep doing what they've been doing. Because as we've seen it ourselves, there is a lot wrong with this party. So what is truly happening? Let's have the conversation. Let's open it up in the comments and let's see how we can adjust. Have yourselves a good one. I'm out.